This is Jean Coutu. He's the pharmacy owner that everybody knows, and he's very recognizable in Quebec. He's got tons of pharmacies in the province and elsewhere. I just read his autobiography, which came out about 6 months ago. It cost me $35, which is pretty hefty stuff. That's including taxes. He says that he gives $5 per book to charity in Haiti. So I thought I'd give you a bit of an idea of what the book's about, since probably you won't get around to reading it yourself. I'm writing an article about him for Canadian Business Magazine, and I'm a writer for Coutu website. So the book starts when he's talking about his childhood, of course, naturally, and he says he was collecting frogs' legs and selling them. So he had an early entrepreneurial spirit. His father was a doctor. They lived up, I think, in Lanaudière, and he had an uncle who lost a fortune. To be quite honest, I didn't read that closely the early sections, because who cares? And he was supposed to become a doctor like his old man, but it didn't quite work out. So he became a pharmacist instead. His first job was working at the Montreal Pharmacy, which was a pretty amazing place, like 5 stories with a fleet of delivery cars and no door in the winter. So the guys would come in and there would be no door. It was just a crazy place. So he was deeply impressed by this Montreal Pharmacy. I guess it planted a seed in his head of what he'd like to do later. So that was back in the day when pharmacists were they were mixing potions all day in creaky drawers, so it was a pretty weird time, and Americans were coming up to buy 222s a lot. That was not available in the States. It was a great drug, apparently, and they really got into it. So that was fueling the pharmacies back then, but most pharmacies, of course, were small little places, nothing like we know today. He went into business with his cousin, and they had a place up in Outremont, and so he managed that place and another place down in Old Montreal. So he was working long hours, and the Old Montreal place was a big-ass restaurant, 800 customers a day and stuff. So he was getting a lot of valuable experience. But he had a bit of an acrimonious split with his cousin, and he eventually ended up at home doing nothing. So he said that was a very depressing time, sitting at home on his butt doing nothing, and he was trying to buy places and a pharmacy of his own, so it wasn't really working out. He was trying this and that and the other. Eventually he got a place on St. Catherine East, deep in the East End. So that he put his all his efforts into increasing business. First thing he did was he stole some, or borrowed some campaigns from the States. One was called Les Bambins en net, so the kids would take as much candy and pay the real price without being checked, and he said that was very successful. And another one was people would vote on who the cutest kid in the neighborhood was. So the more you bought, the more you could vote, and that was those gimmicks were enough to double his business very quickly. So he got interested in all sorts of other stuff. He had an idea of a medical clinic thing, and he got into something called pharmaterias. He basically took the laid-off staff that was working in pharmacies before the law was passed saying you have to actually be a pharmacist to do the pharmacy work. So he took those people, and they became a chain, but he didn't have the buying power. So those little pharmaterias, they weren't really big box stores, so it wasn't really what he wanted to do. Now, he had a bit of an epiphany at this time. A guy named Tremblay, who had a sick wife and he had 2 jobs, came in, and he realized that a doctor cut in front of him, and the doctor said, "Don't forget my discount." And this guy Tremblay heard that, and he realized he wasn't getting a discount. So Coutu himself, who witnessed this, realized that it's not fair for the poor working stiff not to get a discount. So when the first pharmacist called Jean Coutu opened on Mount Royal near the corner of Garnier, it was a big deal, and it bore the name Jean Coutu, not just because that was his name, but because his partner said that's the name of a big famous actor in Quebec, and people will like it more if that's the name on the sign. So people would come in for years saying, "Does the actor who owns a place actually come here once in a while?" And he'd say, "Not very often." So that was a bit of levity in the book, which is otherwise pretty folksy and straightforward, and he comes off as a simple guy. So the idea was that he kept on getting bigger and bigger. So meanwhile, he was constantly having these little disputes with the Pharmacists Association because they weren't really encouraging him to gobble up other pharmacies, and the government itself. He, of course, had the big advantage of being open all the time, so you could sell your shreddies or your shoe insoles any hour of the day. People would come on Sunday. Other places were closed Sunday. So, I mean, the company to this day admits that was a huge advantage for them, that they got that clientele that would be able to come in and buy food all the time. So what happened is they just got bigger and bigger. They were selling out franchises left and right. So Eventually, let me see if I've got numbers on how many they got around this time. They by the end of the 70s, they had let's see. Well, I should mention as well they were lowering their prices to about 30%, 12 to 30% lower than other stores. And the recession came along. It didn't hit them at all. It was 1979 to 1982. Their business has only gone up. So it was a recession-proof thing as well. And what happened is they expanded to New Brunswick. They got about 293 at this point, pharmacies, which is quite a lot. Big boom. They had 16 in New Brunswick, and people in New Brunswick, where the Francophones recognized the name, they liked it. But they tried to go in Ontario, and it wasn't quite as successful. They did Maxi drugs. He didn't really jive to them. 1980, of course, is a referendum. He voted yes, but then again, after that, he wasn't for separatism after that, so he changed his mind on it, apparently. And so by 1990, he had 250, and he had 5 kids. So all 5 kids were equal shareholders. 2 of them work in the administration. Francois, of course, the youngest son, is the CEO. So he actually technically retired 20 years ago. Now he just left them to run the place, but he of course has become synonymous with the company, as he always has been. He does ads and all that stuff. So there was this big thing. They got into the States, and they kept on buying more and more pharmacies in the States. And what happened is, when they got to a point where they entered long negotiations to gobble up one of the bigger franchise firms, people got wind of it, and all of the employees started moving off elsewhere. And there were other things like they were big on photo outlets in the States, so, and that of course went very obsolete very fast. So that was a huge mistake. He does not admit it. That's the key thing in this book. He does not admit that it was a big mistake, but I mean, everybody else pretty much knows that their foray into the United States, which is all that's left to them, is some shares in Rite Aid, which is not going that well either. So in the book, he talks as well about his charity work, his philanthropy, which includes, I guess, Mali, Haiti, and he gave $10 million to the University of Montreal, although I don't know if he mentioned that actually in this text. He says that his only real regret was not really buying this Big V shopping pharmacy chain in Ontario when he had the chance. He says he was distracted by the problems in the States, and he says that it's a big challenge for them to get success through the next generation as well. So that's pretty much what the book says. It's a pretty easy read. I'm an English guy, but I managed to get through it, and it was simply written. So hope you enjoy what I